Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Imagine for a second that you are sitting in the galley of the International Space Station.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. You are traveling at roughly 17,500 miles per hour.
Yeah.
You are suspended 250 miles above the Earth, surrounded by the absolute freezing vacuum of space.
Right. Not exactly a place where you want things to go wrong.
Exactly. And you are having dinner with your crewmates. You open your mouth to ask for the salt or, maybe just to make a joke, and absolutely no sound comes out.
Oh, wow.
You haven't choked. You aren't in
What?
any pain at all, but your voice is just completely gone. You're completely mute.
It is a genuinely terrifying scenario,
Yeah.
and it is exactly what happened to a United States astronaut recently.
Right. And we will get into the exact biological mechanics of why that might have happened and what it means for our survival as a species a little later.
Which is a huge question mark right now.
It really is. But I wanted to start there because it perfectly encapsulates what we're looking at today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today is Monday, March 30, 2026.
Glad to be here.
And if you are looking at the world right now, whether you are checking your retirement portfolio, reading about the latest massive tech pivot, or watching the literal rockets launching from Florida in the United States, you are watching humanity hit a wall.
A massive wall.
Yeah. Biology, global supply chains, cutting-edge artificial intelligence, they are all colliding right now.
We are witnessing a period of, hyper-adaptation. I mean, normally when you think of adaptation, you think of Darwin.
Right, sure. Slow generational changes.
Exactly.
Oh.
Changes over millions of years. But right now, the environment, whether that is the economic environment, the digital landscape, or low Earth orbit, is changing at the speed of a news cycle.
And we are being forced to adapt in real time.
We have to.
So today we are taking you on a massive journey to understand the how and why behind these adaptations. We aren't just going to list the headlines.
Yeah, we're digging into the mechanics.
Yeah. We are going to look at how a geopolitical choke point halfway across the world is forcing Europe to rewire its entire energy grid. We will look at why the tech giants are suddenly pulling the plug on their most magical-looking AI tools and pushing back against the Pentagon.
That Anthropic case is fascinating.
It really is. Then we're going to escape Earth entirely to look at how engineers are trying to beam gigawatts of solar power down from space using infrared lasers just to keep our internet running.
Which sounds completely sci-fi.
Chuckles. It does. And finally, we will travel 25,000 years into the past to the frozen mountains of Serbia to look at how our ancestors survived the last ice age, which, might just hold the key to how we survive the next century.
Slight chuckle. It is an incredibly ambitious roadmap. But you are absolutely right. The thread connecting all of these events is that human instinct to pivot when the pressure becomes unbearable.
Let's start with the most immediate visceral pressure point on the globe right now. If you have looked at the financial markets this week, you have probably noticed a massive sea of red.
Yeah, the markets are definitely reactive.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average just plummeted between 500 and 800 points, officially dragging us into correction territory.
Right.
Brent crude oil has spiked above $115 a barrel, and it is all stemming from the rapidly escalating conflict involving the United States, Israel, and Iran.
The geopolitical situation has become highly volatile over the past few weeks. To give you the exact groundwork being reported by global news outlets, we are seeing direct military engagements intensifying.
Right.
Just recently, 12 United States service members were wounded in an attack at Prince Sultan Air Base, which is located in Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
At the same time, we have seen Houthi rebel forces launching missile attacks targeting central Israel.
And the political rhetoric from Washington is moving just as fast as the munitions. Current United States President Donald Trump has been very specific about his proposed military strategy.
He has.
He has publicly stated his intent to target Iran's energy infrastructure. Specifically, he pointed to Karg Island. Now, for those who might not know, Karg Island isn't just a dot on the map.
No, it is critical infrastructure.
It's an absolutely massive crude oil export terminal in the Persian Gulf. It handles the vast majority of Iranian oil exports.
And he also made a widely circulated joke about renaming the vital waterway there the Strait of Trump.
Right. And while that highly visible rhetoric dominates the headlines, there are vital diplomatic channels operating quietly in the background, right?
Yeah, currently Pakistan is attempting to step into a mediator role.
Okay.
They are hosting regional peace talks in Islamabad, Pakistan, bringing together diplomatic representatives from Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia.
Trying to find an off-ramp.
The goal there is exactly that, to find some kind of diplomatic off-ramp before this triggers a broader regional war.
But the markets aren't waiting for the diplomats. They are reacting to the physics of the map. And this is where I want to dig in, because the spike in crude oil is obvious. Everyone knows the Middle East produces oil.
Sure.
But the secondary effect, the hidden supply chain crisis, is what actually terrifies me. I was reading the reports on this, and it isn't just oil tankers moving through the Strait of Hormuz. We are talking about massive blockages of fertilizer exports.
That is the critical bottleneck. And to understand why that matters, you really have to look at the chemistry of modern agriculture.
Right, because I think people imagine fertilizer as just, well, manure. They think farmers just buy compost.
So chuckle.
Right.
Right, like it's just organic farming on a massive scale.
Yeah. But modern agriculture is a heavy industrial chemical process.
Exactly. The globe relies on the Haber-Bosch process.
Remind me how that works again.
It's a process that synthesizes ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen. And to get that hydrogen, you need natural gas.
Ah.
The Middle East is a massive producer of both the natural gas and the refined chemical fertilizers required to grow crops at scale.
So if the Strait of Hormuz closes...
Or even if the threat of conflict simply drives maritime insurance premiums so high that commercial shipping companies refuse to send vessels into the Persian Gulf, those fertilizer shipments stop.
I was trying to think of an analogy for this. Okay, let's unpack this. It's like the global economy is a massive highway, and the Strait of Hormuz is the only toll bridge.
That's a good way to look at it.
When that bridge closes, it's not just the oil trucks that get stuck, it's the grocery delivery vans, too. If you choke off the fertilizer exports from the Middle East, you aren't just missing a product on the grocery store shelf today.
No, the impact is delayed but severe.
You are fundamentally stunting the biological growth of next year's crop cycle in the American Midwest or across Europe.
Exactly. You are guaranteeing lower crop yields, which guarantees global food scarcity, which guarantees massive price spikes. Are we looking at a permanent shift in how countries source their basics?
It feels like we have to be.
It is a cascading mechanical failure of the global supply chain. And this vulnerability is exactly what is forcing a radical, rapid adaptation in how major global powers view their own infrastructure.
How so?
Well, for decades, transitioning to renewable energy was framed primarily as an environmental initiative.
Right, saving the planet.
But look at the response right now. Nadia Calvino, the chief of the European Investment Bank, or EIB, just made an urgent public call stating that Europe must double down on energy autonomy.
So she isn't saying we need to build wind turbines to save the polar bears. She's saying we need to build wind turbines so we don't starve when a geopolitical conflict thousands of miles away blocks our shipping lanes.
Precisely. The calculus is completely shifted. Solar panels, wind farms, and local nuclear power plants are now classified as critical national security infrastructure.
That makes total sense.
The astronomical cost of building a domestic energy grid is suddenly much cheaper than the catastrophic economic risk of having your entire economy held hostage by a choke point in the Middle East. It is adaptation born out of absolute necessity.
But the physical choke points, the shipping lanes and the air bases, are only half the war. What fascinates me is how this conflict has immediately bled into the digital space.
The cyber frontline.
Yeah. We're seeing a massive surge in cyber warfare, but it doesn't look like the cyber warfare we see in the movies. It isn't, a countdown clock on a nuclear silo.
No, it is far more insidious than that. For example, a pro-Iranian hacker group known as Handala recently claimed responsibility for breaching the personal email account of Kash Patel,
The director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, in the United States.
Exactly.
And when I read about this, I expected to see that they had stolen undercover agent identities or classified surveillance files, but they didn't.
No, they didn't release anything classified.
They released decade-old photos and a resume.
Right. And simultaneously, the European Commission, the executive arm of the European Union, confirmed that their mobile device management system, a platform called Ivanti, had suffered a cyber attack.
Okay, so help me understand the why here. Because leaking an old resume of the FBI director feels almost, petty.
It does seem that way on the surface.
How does that actually hurt the United States' strategic position?
You have to understand the psychology of asymmetric warfare. In the physical world, if you want to degrade an enemy's capability, you bomb an airfield.
Sure.
But in the cyber domain, especially when smaller or non-state actors are targeting massive superpowers, the goal isn't always physical destruction. The goal is psychological exhaustion and the erosion of institutional trust.
Walk me through that.
It is about demonstrating capability and shattering the illusion of security. If a foreign hacker group can prove they breached the personal, private communications of the top law enforcement official in the United States,
The message is clear.
the implied message to the American public is, if the FBI director cannot even secure his own emails, how can this government possibly protect you? It breeds paranoia.
Oh, I see.
And on an operational level, it forces the entire intelligence apparatus to stop what they are doing, audit their systems, and hunt for the leak. It is a massive drain on time and resources.
It's like throwing a handful of sand into an engine. It might not blow the engine up, but it forces you to pull over and take the whole thing apart.
Slight chuckle. Exactly. And that brings us to the European Commission attack. You mentioned the system was called Avanti, a mobile device management system.
Yeah, I had to look up what that actually means. It's not just hacking a single phone.
No, it is much more valuable than that. A mobile device management system, or MDM, is the centralized software that a massive corporation or government uses to control all the smartphones and tablets issued to their employees.
Okay.
It allows the IT department to push software updates, track locations, or remotely wipe a device if it is lost.
So if you hack that central management system, you basically have the keys to the kingdom. You have access to the pockets of every policymaker and diplomat in the European Union.
Precisely. You can track their physical movements during a geopolitical crisis. You can monitor who they are communicating with.
That is terrifying.
You are gathering intelligence at the exact moment those officials are trying to formulate a response to the crisis in the Middle East. This is how modern warfare adapts. It operates in the shadow of the physical conflict, designed to blind and paralyze the opponent's decision-making apparatus.
That strategy of psychological warfare, draining a government's resources by forcing them to constantly patch vulnerabilities and defend their internal systems, isn't just happening between nations, though.
No, it's domestic as well.
We are actually seeing a very similar friction happening right now between the United States government and the private tech companies they rely on.
This is a profound and relatively unprecedented shift in the military-industrial complex. For the last 50 years, Silicon Valley and the Pentagon have generally operated hand in glove. The military funds the research, the tech sector builds the tools, and everybody wins. But the emergence of advanced artificial intelligence has fundamentally fractured that relationship.
We have to talk about the Anthropic ruling because this completely blew my mind. United States District Judge Rita Lynn recently handed down a landmark ruling.
A very significant one.
She halted an official order from the Department of Defense, which had officially labeled the artificial intelligence company Anthropic as a national security risk.
And the context here is absolutely vital for you to understand the gravity of this. Anthropic is one of the leading AI labs in the world. They developed the Claude AI system.
Right.
And unlike a traditional software company that might build a spreadsheet application or a database, an AI company is building cognitive architecture.
It's a decision engine.
Yes. The United States military wanted to utilize Anthropic's technology for some very specific applications, reportedly involving domestic surveillance capabilities and the integration into autonomous weaponry systems.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You have a private tech company looking at the U.S. military, arguably the largest, most lucrative client on Earth, and saying, no, our AI doesn't wear combat boots.
They actively resisted. They refused to allow their models to be fine-tuned for those lethal or surveillance-heavy applications.
What does this mean for the future of military contracting?
Well, in response, the Department of Defense didn't just walk away. They essentially attempted to blacklist Anthropic. They directed all defense contractors to discontinue using Anthropic services and labeled them a security risk.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. Or rather, let me try to understand the legal mechanism.
Sure.
If a company is based in the United States and the government invokes national security, doesn't the government usually have the power under the Defense Production Act or similar statutes to compel cooperation? How does a private company win this fight?
That is exactly the legal precedent Judge Lynn's ruling addresses. The judge fundamentally criticized the government's designation. The ruling established that the government cannot arbitrarily wield the label of national security risk as a punitive measure against a domestic company simply because that company exercises its right to dissent over how its product is used.
Oh, wow. So the government was trying to treat a company located in San Francisco, California, the same way they would treat a hostile foreign intelligence service, just because the company had a conscience.
Exactly. It forces a massive adaptation in military procurement. The Department of of Defense now has to adapt to the reality that they cannot simply command the tech sector to build cognitive weapons.
They have to negotiate on ethical terms.
Right. If a company draws an ethical line in the sand regarding autonomous lethal force, the government cannot legally ostracize them into bankruptcy. It protects the right of corporate dissent in the age of AI.
But the tension between AI companies and the military is only one part of the tech sector's current existential crisis. Anthropic is fighting over ethics, but the rest of the AI industry is fighting over sheer, brutal economics.
The financial reality is setting in.
If you have been following the tech space for the last 2 years, it has felt like a gold rush. Every week, there was a new magical AI tool that was going to change the world. But right now, the industry is hitting a massive reality check.
We are witnessing the end of the parlor trick phase of generative AI and the beginning of the infrastructure phase. The bills are coming due, and they are staggering.
Let's use OpenAI as the prime example here. They recently made the quiet but massive decision to shut down Sora.
Yes, their video generation model.
Now, for anyone who doesn't remember, Sora was their text-to-video generation tool. When they demoed it a year or so ago, it looked like literal magic. You could type a cinematic shot of a woolly mammoth walking through a snowy Tokyo street, and it would generate a photorealistic video.
It was incredibly impressive.
People were terrified. They thought Hollywood was going to disappear overnight. Disney even partnered with them. I don't get this. You have Disney on the hook. You have a product that captures the entire globe's imagination. In tech, you usually launch the minimum viable product and figure out the profit margins later. So if OpenAI is pulling the plug on Sora entirely, the math must be so violently upside down that it threatens their core business. What is eating all that money?
To understand why Sora failed economically, you have to look at the underlying physics and computational architecture of how it works.
Okay, lay it on me.
Most people are familiar with large language models, or LLMs, like ChatGPT. An LLM operates primarily on next token prediction. It analyzes a string of text and mathematically predicts the most likely next word. It is computationally heavy, but it is manageable.
Right, it's basically a hyper-advanced version of the autocomplete on my phone.
Exactly. But video generation models like Sora do not work like that. They primarily utilize diffusion models combined with transformer architectures.
Which means what, exactly?
They are not predicting the next word. They are predicting the physical state of millions of individual pixels across dozens of frames per second, ensuring temporal consistency.
Temporal consistency, meaning it has to remember what happened a second ago.
Exactly. If a character turns their head in frame 1, the model has to remember the exact lighting, physics, and geometry of the background to render frame 2 accurately.
And doing that requires
what, mate?
Just banks and banks of servers.
It requires an unfathomable amount of compute power. We are talking about massive clusters of NVIDIA H100 graphics processing units, GPUs, running at maximum capacity just to generate a 10-second clip.
So it isn't just a code problem, it's a thermodynamics problem.
Precisely. It is a thermodynamics problem and an energy problem. The electricity required to run those GPUs and the water required to cool the data centers makes the cost of generating a single video clip astronomically high.
Wow.
So when OpenAI partnered with Disney, they likely realized that scaling this tool for millions of consumers to use daily would literally bankrupt the company due to server costs.
Because every time someone asks for a video of a dancing cat, it costs the company real money in electricity.
Exactly. The initial gold rush focused on creating these magical demos to secure venture capital. But the practical utility, combined with the exorbitant cost, means it is incredibly difficult to build a sustainable business model.
Which explains exactly what Apple is doing right now. Because while OpenAI is pulling back on the magical video generators, Apple is completely pivoting its own AI strategy.
Apple is taking a very different route.
They're moving away from trying to build the smartest, omniscient chatbot. Instead, they are taking an app store and search-like platform approach.
It's brilliant in its pragmatism.
And at the same time, over in the decentralized social media space, Bluesky is launching an AI app called Addy, which is just designed to build custom, user-tailored feeds.
Right. Apple watched the bloodbath of the generative AI space. They watched companies burn billions of dollars trying to build the ultimate singular intelligence. Apple realized that building that single model is a money pit.
But Apple has an inherent advantage. They own the ecosystem. Hundreds of millions of people carry an iOS device in their pocket. So instead of trying to build the coolest single race car, Apple is pivoting to just owning the racetrack and charging everyone else to drive on it.
Chuckles. That is the perfect analogy. They are adapting to the economic reality of the technology. They are creating the platform.
And Bluesky.
Bluesky's ADDIE reflects a similar maturity. Instead of using AI to generate endless hallucinatory text or deepfake videos, which just adds to the noise, they are using AI for curation. They are using the intelligence to solve the problem of information overload for the user.
That makes a lot of sense.
The industry is fundamentally adapting from asking, what is the most mind-blowing thing this algorithm can do, to asking, what is the most useful, economically sustainable thing this algorithm can do?
But even if we pivot to more sustainable AI models, they still require immense, mind-boggling amounts of power. And this is where all our threads start to tie together.
The energy bottleneck.
Exactly. We just talked about how the traditional power grids here on Earth are maxed out.
Yeah.
We talked about how traditional energy supplies, natural gas and oil, are caught in the crosshairs of geopolitical wars in places like the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
So, if you are a massive tech company and you need gigawatts of power to run your AI servers, and Earth's grids are tapped out, and the shipping lanes are blocked, where do you look?
You have to look outside the system entirely. You look up. We are witnessing the very real, heavily capitalized beginning of an orbital infrastructure boom.
And when I say heavily capitalized, I am not talking about a few college students with a weather balloon. Let's talk about StarCloud.
A very ambitious startup.
This is a startup that just closed a Series A funding round, raising $170 million. That puts their valuation at $1.1 billion. They became a tech unicorn almost overnight.
Which is incredible.
And their business model sounds like pure science fiction. They're building data centers in space, literally orbiting the Earth, powered entirely by solar energy, specifically dedicated to AI computing.
It sounds like science fiction until you look at the fundamental engineering problems they're trying to solve. Terrestrial data centers, the ones on Earth, face two massive bottlenecks: energy generation and thermal management.
Okay, let's break both of those down. Let's start with thermal management, because I feel like that is the less obvious one. My laptop gets hot when I open too many browser tabs. I cannot imagine the heat generated by a warehouse full of AI servers.
It is immense. On Earth, cooling a hyperscale data center requires millions of gallons of fresh water and massive industrial air conditioning systems. You are fighting the ambient temperature of the Earth, and you are fighting the atmosphere.
Okay, but in low Earth orbit, the environment is entirely different. Space is freezing, so you just open a window, essentially.
Slight chuckle. Well, it's actually more complicated than that, and this is a common misconception. Space isn't cold in the way a winter day in Chicago is cold.
It isn't.
No,
Oh.
space is a vacuum. It doesn't really have a temperature because there are so few particles to hold thermal energy.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I understand the physics here. If there is no air, how does the server cool down? On Earth, the fan blows air over the hot chip, the air takes the heat and moves it away. That's convective cooling.
Exactly.
If there is no air in space, a fan does nothing. Wouldn't the server just melt itself?
That is exactly the engineering hurdle. You cannot use convective cooling. Instead, you have to rely entirely on radiative cooling.
Meaning?
You build massive radiator panels that conduct the heat away from the silicon chips and then radiate that thermal energy directly into the deep vacuum of space as infrared light.
Oh, wow.
It requires highly specialized engineering, but once you master the thermal radiation panels, you completely eliminate the need for millions of gallons of cooling water.
Okay, so that solves the cooling problem. What about the power problem? Because on Earth, solar panels only work when the sun is up, and even then, clouds get in the way.
That is the second massive advantage of low Earth orbit. In the right orbital trajectory, a satellite is not subjected to the day-night cycle, weather patterns, or atmospheric filtering.
It just sits in the sun constantly.
The solar arrays can harvest pure, unattenuated solar radiation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is a relentless, infinite power source.
But StarCloud isn't the only company looking at the sun. There's another startup taking an arguably even wilder approach. We have to talk about Aetherflux.
Ah, yes. Space-based solar power.
This company was founded by Baidu Bot, who previously co-founded Robinhood. They just reportedly started raising a Series B funding round at a $2 billion
A
valuation.
massive valuation.
And their plan isn't to put the servers in space. Their plan is to put the solar panels in space, capture the energy, and then physically beam that electricity down to the surface of the Earth.
Yes. The concept has been around in academic circles since the 1970s, actually.
Really?
Yes, but the launch costs were always too high. Now, with the advent of reusable rockets drastically lowering the cost per kilogram to orbit, it is economically viable to test.
Wait, beaming power down with infrared lasers? That sounds incredibly sci-fi.
It does.
How safe is this, and is it actually more efficient than just building solar panels in a desert here on Earth? I mean, you read about beaming power from space, and you picture a giant microwave laser frying a city.
Chuckles. Safety is the paramount concern, obviously. Traditional concepts for space-based solar power relied on microwave transmission, which required receiving antennas on Earth that were miles wide.
Okay.
Aetherflux is utilizing infrared lasers, which are much more tightly focused, allowing for smaller receiving stations on the ground.
But seriously, a laser powerful enough to beam a city's worth of electricity from space, how does a bird flying through it not instantly vaporize? Or a commercial airliner? What is the actual physics of making that safe?
It is a phenomenal question. To prevent it from acting like a weapon, the system relies on phased array optics and real-time atmospheric feedback loops.
Break that down for me. What is a feedback loop in a laser?
Essentially, there is a low-power pilot beam that shines up from the ground station to the satellite.
Okay, so it's a two-way street.
Yes. The satellite uses that pilot beam to calibrate its targeting and understand the atmospheric conditions, like a cloud or a flock of birds moving into the path. If that pilot beam is interrupted, even for a microsecond, the satellite instantly diffuses the main power beam.
So it isn't one solid, dumb beam of light. It's a smart beam that is constantly talking to the ground, and if the connection stutters, it scatters the energy so widely that it's harmless by the time it hits the bird.
Exactly. It spreads the optical energy out so thinly that it wouldn't even warm your skin. But when it is focused on the receiving rectenna, a specialized antenna that converts electromagnetic energy into direct current electricity, it is incredibly efficient.
And the strategic implications of this are just staggering. If you think back to the very beginning of this deep dive, we talked about the global economy panicking because the Strait of Hormuz might close.
Yes.
But if you have a constellation of aetherflux satellites,
You completely bypass terrestrial choke points.
you bypass the ocean entirely. You don't care if a shipping lane is closed. You don't care if a natural gas pipeline is bombed. You could set up a remote military base or a research station or eventually a hospital in a disaster zone, roll out a receiving dish, and have instant, unlimited power beaming straight down from the sky.
It is the ultimate adaptation for true energy autonomy. You are literally removing terrestrial geopolitics from the energy supply chain.
It is mind-blowing. We are solving Earth's political and computational problems by expanding our infrastructure into the cosmos.
We are trying to, at least.
But here is the massive reality check. Sending servers and solar panels to low Earth orbit is, at the end of the day, an engineering problem. You can build a tougher satellite. You can build a more precise laser.
Exactly.
But as we push further into space to maintain these systems, the most fragile variable is us.
Which brings us to the profound human element of this deep dive, because biology is vastly harder to adapt than technology.
And we have a stark, terrifying reminder of that.
Oh.
Let's go back to the story I opened the show with. Aboard the International Space Station, the ISS, a NASA National Aeronautics and Space Administration astronaut experienced a medical emergency that sounds like a scene from a psychological thriller.
It was a highly concerning and entirely unprecedented event.
Right. During a routine dinner with the crew, this astronaut suddenly completely lost the ability to speak.
They experienced no pain, no shortness of breath, no cognitive decline. They just suffered a sudden, complete inability to vocalize.
The incident lasted for about 20 minutes, and the crew immediately contacted the flight surgeons down on the ground in Houston. And I was reading the reports. The doctors on the ground went through the entire diagnostic checklist. They ruled out a stroke.
They ruled out choking or an allergic reaction as well.
But the incident was so concerning that it resulted in the first ever medical evacuation from the ISS. They put the astronaut in a capsule and brought them back to Earth.
And what makes this story so chilling is the aftermath.
That they still don't know what happened.
Right. Despite undergoing a battery of tests back on Earth at advanced medical facilities, the cause remains entirely unknown. It is a complete medical mystery.
So what does this all mean for our deep space ambitions? Are we biologically ready for this? My first thought is that it has to be related to the microgravity environment.
Highly likely.
If you are floating in zero-G for months, the fluids in your body aren't being pulled down to your legs anymore. They shift upward into your chest and your head. Could that fluid shift create pressure on a nerve, like the vagus nerve or something connected to the vocal cords?
That is a very strong hypothesis, and it is exactly the kind of mechanism flight surgeons study. We know that microgravity is inherently hostile to human biology.
We know about bone density and muscle loss.
Yes, the macro effects. Bone density decreases, muscle atrophy occurs because you aren't fighting gravity, and cosmic radiation exposure increases. But the micro effects are still largely a mystery. The cephalad fluid shift, which is the medical term for that fluid moving into the upper body, increases intracranial pressure. It can flatten the back of the eyeballs and degrade vision.
Wow.
So it is entirely plausible that a sudden spike in pressure or a micro swelling of tissue in the larynx or along a cranial nerve could temporarily paralyze the vocal mechanism.
But the fact that we don't know for sure is what terrifies me.
Mm.
If this happens on the ISS, you have an abort option. You get in a Soyuz or a Dragon capsule, and you are back on solid ground in a hospital within a few hours.
Yes.
But what does this mean for our deep space ambitions? We are talking about going to Mars.
If this happens on a transit to Mars, an evacuation is physically impossible.
Chuckles. It's kind of dark, but you can't just call an Uber.
Chuckles. No, you certainly cannot. The orbital mechanics dictate a transit time of roughly 7 to 9 months one way. If an unexplained neurological or physiological event occurs 60 days into that journey, the crew is entirely on their own. They cannot turn around.
That isolation is unfathomable. It forces a massive adaptation in how NASA and other space agencies approach mission planning. It means you can't just send a first aid kit.
No, you have to develop autonomous medical AI, surgical robots, and diagnostic tools that can operate completely independently of Earth's guidance, because the radio delay alone to Mars can be up to 20 minutes.
Right. The human body is not evolved for the vacuum of space. We're trying to force a biological machine adapted for 1G of gravity in a thick atmosphere into an environment it was never meant to survive.
It's the ultimate adaptation challenge.
But despite those massive, terrifying biological risks, we are pushing forward. We are returning to the moon.
The Artemis program.
Right now, the Artemis II crew is gathered at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, United States, gearing up for their historic mission. They're going to fly around the moon and return, laying the groundwork for a lunar landing.
This is a monumental stunt. It is the first crewed mission of the Space Launch System, the SLS rocket, and the Orion spacecraft.
And the crew composition really reflects a new era of exploration, distinct from the Apollo days. We have mission specialist Christina Koch, who is set to become the first woman to fly around the moon.
Which is fantastic.
And we also have Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen. And I absolutely love looking at the details of this mission, specifically his role. Astronauts design their own personal mission patches, right?
They do, yes.
And Hansen's patch features a Sasquatch.
Chuckles, yes. Which might seem unusual for a highly technical, multi-billion-dollar space mission.
It totally does.
But is deeply symbolic. The Sasquatch on his patch symbolizes honesty and a profound connection to nature.
Oh, I see.
It draws on folklore and respect for the natural world, acknowledging that as we push into the sterile void of space, we must remain tethered to our humanity.
And you see that exact same sentiment echoing in pop culture right now. It was just announced that Kristen Stewart is slated to play Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, in an upcoming Amazon miniseries.
I believe it's called The Challenger?
Yes. The contrast there is what I find fascinating. On one hand, you have the SLS rocket sitting on the pad in Florida. It is arguably the most complex piece of thermodynamic and aerospace machinery ever built by humans.
It represents cold, hard physics, orbital mechanics, and ruthless engineering.
But on the other hand, you have an astronaut weaving a Sasquatch into his mission patch to represent honesty, and a Hollywood production company spending millions of dollars to explore the human drama, the fear, and the triumph of Sally Ride's journey.
It reminds us that going to space is never just a scientific endeavor.
Right.
It is a deeply emotional, philosophical, and cultural endeavor. We adapt our technology, our lasers, and our rockets to get us out there, but we carry our humanity, our art, our folklore, our fears with us into the void.
And as we look up to the moon and dream of Mars, the science we are conducting in the cosmos is actually forcing us to look backward. New discoveries in astrophysics and archaeology are completely rewriting our understanding of the universe's violent history and our own origin story.
The universe is constantly providing us with new data that shatters our preconceived notions.
Let's look at Saturn. For as long as humanity has had telescopes good enough to resolve it, Saturn's rings have been its defining, majestic feature. But we never entirely knew where they came from.
We had theories, but no solid proof.
Now, incredibly complex new computer simulations have provided compelling evidence that those iconic rings are actually the debris of a lost, shattered moon.
It is a profoundly violent origin story for something so beautiful. To understand how this happens, you have to understand orbital mechanics, specifically a concept called the Roche limit.
Okay, yes, break this down for me. What exactly is the Roche limit?
Imagine two celestial bodies, a massive planet like Saturn, and a smaller moon orbiting it. Gravity is not uniform. The side of the moon facing Saturn feels a stronger gravitational pull than the far side of the moon.
Because it's physically closer to the planet.
Exactly. This difference in gravitational pull across the diameter of the moon creates what we call tidal forces.
Like the tides on Earth from our moon.
Right. Now, the moon is held together by its own internal gravity. But if that moon orbits too close to Saturn, it crosses a mathematical boundary known as the Roche limit.
What happens at that boundary?
At this specific distance, the tidal forces exerted by Saturn become stronger than the moon's own self-gravity holding it together.
So it's like two people holding hands on a spinning playground merry-go-round, and the centrifugal force just gets so strong that their grip slips and they fly apart.
That is a great way to visualize it. The gravitational shear literally tore the moon apart.
Wow.
It didn't just break into large asteroids. It ground the moon down into billions of pieces of ice and rock dust that now spread out along the orbital plane, creating the rings we see today.
It shows us that the solar system is not a static, peaceful diorama. It is dynamic, destructive, and constantly reshaping itself.
And if we look even further out into the cosmos, scientists have finally solved a 20-year-old mystery regarding the Crab pulsar.
Oh, this one is wild.
They have figured out the physics behind its strange zebra stripes of radiation.
This is a fascinating breakthrough in plasma physics. But before we get to the stripes, what exactly is a pulsar?
A pulsar is a highly magnetized rotating neutron star. It is the collapsed core of a massive star that went supernova.
So it's super dense.
Incredibly dense. Imagine the mass of our entire sun crushed into a sphere the size of a city, and they spin rapidly, emitting beams of electromagnetic radiation from their magnetic poles, much like a lighthouse.
But the Crab pulsar was doing something weird. It wasn't just a steady pulse. The radio waves it emitted had these peculiar striped patterns, the zebra strikes. Why did that puzzle astrophysicists for 2 decades?
Because traditional models of magnetic fields couldn't explain the highly organized, high-frequency striping. What the new research suggests is that as the pulsar spins, its immense magnetic field whips the surrounding plasma, a superheated soup of electrons and positrons, into a frenzy.
Okay, a superheated plasma frenzy.
This creates magnetic reconnection events.
Wait, what is magnetic reconnection?
It's a physical process where magnetic field lines from different magnetic domains come together, break apart, and instantly reconnect, releasing massive, explosive amounts of energy.
Kind of like twisting a rubber band until it snaps.
Yes, it's the same mechanism that causes solar flares on our sun. In the Crab pulsar, these reconnection events in the plasma occur in highly structured, repeating patterns near the pulsar's equator, generating the striped radio emission.
Unraveling this shows how our theoretical physics models are constantly having to adapt to the bizarre, extreme realities of the deep universe.
Exactly.
But we don't have to look light years away to find incredible stories of survival and adaptation in extreme environments. We can bring the story right back down to Earth.
To our own history.
Yeah, let's travel back roughly 25,000 years to the last glacial maximum.
This was the absolute peak of the last ice age. Vast continental ice sheets covered much of North America, Northern Europe, and Asia.
The global climate was incredibly harsh, dry, and freezing.
Very inhospitable.
And this is where my preconceived notions were completely shattered. When you picture Ice Age humans, you picture them fleeing the advancing glaciers.
Moving south. Right.
You picture them migrating toward the equator, looking for plains and valleys where the weather was warmer. But recent archaeological discoveries in Serbia, specifically in the Uptja, Pecina, and Balanica caves, show that early humans actually did the exact opposite.
It is a paradigm-shifting discovery for anthropology.
We always picture Ice Age humans fleeing the cold. But this shows they actually leaned into the extreme environment. They figured out how to use the mountains to their advantage.
Excavations in these high mountainous caves in Serbia have uncovered a wealth of artifacts, Middle and Upper Paleolithic stone tools, remnants of ancient fauna, and critically, the remains of extensive fire pits.
But why go up into the mountains during an ice age? That seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't the mountains be even colder?
That is the genius of their adaptation. You have to look at the specific thermal properties of the landscape. Yes, the ambient temperature was freezing. But these ancient humans didn't just passively migrate away from the cold.
They got strategic.
They actively adapted their survival strategies by analyzing the microclimates. Limestone caves like Upyapechina act as massive thermal masses.
Oh, I see where this is going.
They insulate against the extreme biting winds of the open plains. The ambient temperature deep inside a cave remains relatively stable compared to the violent fluctuations outside.
If they basically found natural stone bunkers.
Precisely. These Serbian caves were not just temporary, desperate shelters, they were strategic refugia.
They mastered the continuous use of fire.
Not just for warmth, but likely to manipulate the airflow within the cave structures. They adapted their hunting and gathering techniques to the specific, brutal ecosystem of the frozen mountains, targeting specific alpine fauna that also sought refuge in those elevations.
It completely rewrites our understanding of European migration during the Ice Age. It proves our ancestors were highly adaptable problem solvers.
They really were.
They didn't just run from the cold. They looked at a frozen, hostile mountain range, analyzed the thermal properties of limestone, and said, we can engineer a way to survive here.
It is a profound testament to human resilience. The tools they crafted were sophisticated, tailored to the specific challenges of butchering frozen game and working hides for insulation.
It wasn't just survival by the skin of their teeth.
No, it was calculated, innovative adaptation to an environment that should have killed them.
Which makes it all the more sobering when we contrast that ancient triumph of survival with a very modern biological threat. Because while we may have conquered the Ice Age, our battle with biology and nature is never truly over.
You are referring to the resurgence of tuberculosis?
Yes. Tuberculosis, or TB, the bacterial infection historically known as the White Plague, is making a massive, unexpected comeback right here in the United States.
It's a very worrying trend. Provisional data released by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, covering 2025 and moving into 2026, reveals a very concerning, steep upward trajectory in TB infections across the country.
For decades, public health officials believed we were on a steady path to entirely eradicating this disease in the U.S.
But biology adapts too. We talk about humans adapting, but the bacteria are playing the exact same evolutionary game.
Right. They're evolving to survive us.
Precisely. The bacterium that causes TB, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, is highly adept at mutating. When patients do not complete their full, lengthy course of antibiotics, the surviving bacteria learn how to resist the drug.
They literally mutate their cell walls to block the antibiotics from entering.
Yes. This leads to multi-drug-resistant TB, which is incredibly difficult and expensive to treat.
And when you combine that biological adaptation with our modern global behavior, massive international travel, crowded urban centers, and disparities in healthcare access, the disease finds new, highly efficient ways to spread.
It forces our entire public health infrastructure to adapt constantly.
We have to develop new, rapid diagnostic tools, synthesize novel antibiotic compounds, and implement rigorous contact tracing.
It is a literal arms race against a microscopic organism, proving that adaptation is a continuous, unending process.
It really puts everything into perspective. We have spent this entire deep dive looking at how humanity pivots when our backs are against the wall. We started by looking at how the global economy is frantically trying to adapt to the closure of shipping lanes and fertilizer blockages in the Middle East, desperately seeking energy autonomy through renewables.
We saw the tech industry adapting, with AI companies pushing back against military applications in federal court and pivoting away from computationally impossible dreams like generating video toward pragmatic, platform-based infrastructure.
We looked at the audacious engineering plans to beam solar power down from satellites using infrared lasers, bypassing Earth's terrestrial limits entirely, while also reckoning with the fragile reality of our own biology when an astronaut loses their voice in the cold, isolated vacuum of space.
And we trace that spirit of survival all the way back to the violent astrophysics of Saturn's shattered moons and the freezing caves of Ice Age Serbia, where our ancestors used the thermal mass of limestone to survive a global deep freeze.
From surviving those freezing caves 25,000 years ago to beaming solar power from space today just to bypass global supply chain wars, humanity's defining trait isn't just our intelligence, it is our relentless, stubborn adaptability. When the thermostat breaks, we don't just freeze, we invent a new way to build a fire.
Think about those early humans huddling around a fire in a frozen Serbian cave. They used the absolute limit of their technology fire and chipped stone to survive a climate crisis that seemed insurmountable.
Yeah.
Today, we are facing geopolitical gridlock, massive power shortages, and microscopic biological mysteries. The fundamental question isn't whether we will adapt. History proves we always do. The real question is whether our new fire artificial intelligence and orbital space infrastructure will be used to isolate ourselves into digital bunkers or to illuminate the dark for everyone.
That is the question we all have to answer next. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you. Keep looking for the mechanical patterns behind the headlines. And remember that no matter how fast the world changes, you are fundamentally built to adapt to it. We will catch you next time.
Enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to The Debate. You know, when a bone heals incorrectly after a severe fracture, medical science dictates a rather brutal remedy. You can't just put a brace on it and hope for the best.
Right, you have to intentionally re-break the bone to set it straight.
Exactly. You have to re-break it. It is a violent, painful process, but it's really the only way to achieve structural integrity for the rest of the patient's life.
Yeah, but what if breaking that bone sends the patient into systemic shock? I mean, we like to think we can isolate trauma, but the human body, much like the global system we are going to discuss today, is highly interconnected. Sometimes, the shock of the cure is significantly more lethal than the original limp.
And that exact tension between a painful, necessary cure and a potentially fatal shock to the system, that is the diagnostic muddy water we're navigating today. We're examining the sweeping global implications of the ongoing U.S.-Israeli military intervention in Iran.
Which is now entering its 5th week, right?
Yes, entering its 5th week as of today, March 30, 2026. The central question before us is this. Are the severe global disruptions currently rippling across the planet from soaring energy costs to fundamentally shifting alliances, are they the necessary growing pains of neutralizing authoritarian threats and restructuring a fragile global system?
Or, on the flip side, are they the symptoms of a disastrous military overreach that is fracturing the international order and, empowering rival powers?
Exactly.
It is a question that requires us to look far beyond the immediate battlefield in the Middle East. And just to set the stage, this discussion is entirely grounded in recent international intelligence, financial market data, and diplomatic reports regarding the ongoing conflict and its planetary fallout.
Right. We really have to look at this from a truly global perspective. And for our listeners, I represent the perspective that this intervention, while economically and diplomatically painful in the short term, is a necessary stress test.
A stress test?
Yes, an action that will ultimately dismantle hostile regional threats and force the creation of more resilient, independent global supply chains.
And I represent the contrasting perspective. I argue that this intervention is a strategic failure. It's causing disproportionate harm to the global economy, particularly in the global south, while accelerating a geopolitical fracture that ultimately empowers alternative, multipolar blocs led by nations like China and Russia.
Okay, let me outline my position clearly from the start, because we really cannot look at the current market turmoil in a vacuum.
Sure.
Yes, the financial headlines are grim. The Dow has plunged nearly 800 points and entered correction territory. The S&P 500 has posted its 5th straight losing week, and, Brent crude oil has surged past $115 a barrel.
Which is just a massive hit for importing nations.
It is, absolutely, but this is the unavoidable cost of confronting a systemic, deep-rooted threat. For decades, global markets and vital shipping lanes, specifically the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz, were held hostage by state-sponsored actors and proxies like the Houthis.
But
we allowed a persistent vulnerability to dictate the terms of global trade. By taking decisive action, including the reported destruction of a third of Iran's missile stockpile, the U.S. and its allies are finally forcing a necessary decoupling.
But at what cost? I mean, you mention a necessary decoupling, but the collateral damage we are witnessing severely outweighs the tactical military gains.
I would argue the economic shock is actually driving vital strategic pivots that we've just put off for too long. Look at the European Union's recent $2.3 billion investment in the Orbital corridor.
Right. The rail project in Africa.
Exactly. For those tracking the global supply chain, that is a massive railway infrastructure project cutting right across southern Africa, from Angola through the Democratic Republic of Congo into Zambia. It's designed to bypass traditional, vulnerable maritime choke points and transport critical minerals like cobalt and copper directly to the Atlantic.
Okay, but
That kind of independent supply chain just doesn't happen without a massive catalyst. We are essentially ripping off the Band-Aid to secure a rules-based future.
the problem with the Band-Aid metaphor is that it vastly minimizes the planetary pain. When you talk about the markets, you're focusing on Wall Street losing $300 billion in the Magnificent Seven. Those massive tech stocks like Apple and Nvidia that prop up Western portfolios.
Well, they prop up a lot of global index funds, too.
Sure, but that is an incredibly Western-centric framing of this crisis. We are looking at a global food supply bottleneck right now that is going to devastate the developing world.
Devastate is a strong word. You're talking about the petrochemical disruptions?
I am, and we really need to explain the mechanics of how that works. It's not just about the price of gasoline at the pump, right? Natural gas from the Gulf is the primary ingredient in ammonia, and ammonia is the absolute bedrock of global fertilizer production.
Right.
When you blockade the Gulf's petrochemical outputs, fertilizer production stalls worldwide. A stalled plant today means significantly lower crop yields in Brazil or sub-Saharan Africa 6 months from now. You aren't just hurting a regime in Tehran, you are mathematically guaranteeing a global food shortage.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. You make a terrifying point about the agricultural timeline, and honestly, I hadn't fully considered the lag between ammonia production and Brazilian crop yields.
It's a huge blind spot for a lot of policymakers.
Fair enough. But we are already seeing evidence that the architects of this intervention are utilizing pragmatic, albeit uncomfortable, diplomatic flexibility to prevent total systemic collapse. They aren't just blindly breaking things.
Where is the evidence of that flexibility? Because the markets certainly aren't seeing it right now.
Well, we just saw the United States ease its blockade rhetoric to allow a Russian oil tanker to approach Cuba. Why? Because Venezuela's energy supply was disrupted, and the U.S. realizes it cannot allow a complete infrastructural collapse in the Caribbean right in its own backyard. That proves the coalition is capable of recalibrating. They are managing the cast, so to speak. The global economy's reliance on authoritarian energy is exactly like that poorly healed bone we discussed at the top of the show. It requires a painful, intentional re-break to set it straight for long-term health and genuine energy autonomy.
I come at it from a different way. I reject the re-break analogy entirely, because the surgeons deciding to break the bone are not the ones who actually have to wear the cast.
How so?
The architects of this war, sitting in Washington or London, are forcing the world's most vulnerable populations to bear the excruciating pain of this transition. You mentioned the Russian tanker heading to Cuba. That is a reactive Band-Aid to a crisis of the West's own making. It is not a sign of grand strategic control. It's a sign of panic.
Panic seems like an overstatement when it's just a calculated easing of sanctions.
It is panic when you look at the broader data. I mean, Brent crude above $115 a barrel isn't just a number blinking red on a terminal. It fundamentally dictates the cost of shipping every metric ton of grain and every container of manufactured goods globally. Look at Asia.
Okay, let's look at Asia.
Asian economies are the engine of global growth, and they are scrambling right now. Their energy imports are paralyzed. Even niche economic lifelines like used car exports from Asia to the Middle East have completely frozen.
Right. Trade has slowed.
Slowed? Vulnerable nations like Kosovo are struggling right now just to keep the power grids functioning because they are completely priced out of the fuel market. When you subject the global system to an unmanageable energy shortage, you are not building resiliency. You are mathematically guaranteeing a global recession.
But isn't that acute shock exactly what forces long overdue diplomatic realignment? I mean, for years, soft power and endless negotiations have repeatedly failed to secure the Strait of Hormuz. We've watched as actors with drone swarms essentially instituted a toll booth on global trade.
True.
Hard power, however, is successfully forcing regional actors to take responsibility for their own backyard, rather than relying on an unsustainable, heavily subsidized status quo.
Wait, you think this intervention is actually fostering diplomacy?
I know it is. Right now, there are ongoing four-nation mediation talks being hosted in Pakistan. It's bringing together Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. This is unprecedented regional engagement.
Okay, but
These powers are stepping up to mediate because the military intervention has made the cost of inaction too high for them to ignore, and it is yielding tangible results. Intelligence sources indicate that Iran is expected to formally respond to the 15-point U.S. peace proposal this Friday.
let's talk about that 15-point proposal in those talks.
We have to acknowledge that without the destruction of a third of their missile capabilities, without that overwhelming demonstration of force, Tehran would never be at the table considering a 15-point framework that demands structural demilitarization. The military pressure is the direct mechanism generating this diplomatic progress.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. That mediation in Pakistan is born of sheer regional terror, not constructive diplomacy.
Fear is a powerful motivator.
Yes. But Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia are not stepping in because they endorse the U.S.-Israeli strategy. They are stepping in because they are terrified of a total regional conflagration that will wipe out their own economies and plunge the Middle East into a multi-decade dark age.
But the motivation, whether it's fear or alignment, still results in regional powers taking ownership of regional stability. Isn't the outcome what actually matters here?
The outcome is a humanitarian and diplomatic catastrophe that is actively isolating the West from the rest of the planet. Let's look at the diplomatic backlash, which is severe. Human Rights Watch has publicly warned of a dangerous, proud disregard for international law among the world leaders prosecuting this war.
Well,
And the Pope just delivered a searing rebuke, referring directly to leaders with hands full of blood. In Lebanon alone, over 1 million civilians have been displaced by the expanding strikes.
the humanitarian toll is undeniable and tragic. I will concede that the displacement in Lebanon is a profound crisis.
And it has massive geopolitical consequences. While the West is bogged down fighting this war and alienating its neighbors with aggressive rhetoric like former U.S. President Trump's recent threat to seize Karg Island to take the oil, rival powers are quietly building alternative architectures.
You're talking about Karg Island's export capacity?
Yes, Karg Island handles over 90% of Iran's crude exports, much of which goes to China. When Western leaders casually threaten to seize it, they send a shockwave of panic straight to Beijing. The Global South sees this, and they are making their contingency plans.
Like what?
Belarus and North Korea are suddenly signing friendship treaties and discussing opening embassies. Russia is deeply expanding its security and economic ties across Africa, offering military guarantees in exchange for resource access. You are looking at forced compliance and calling it diplomacy, but the majority of the planet sees it as blatant military hegemony.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. The fact that the West is maintaining a strong posture, including moving more troops into the Middle East to deter further aggression, proves that the United States and its allies remain the ultimate guarantors of maritime and global security.
Or the ultimate disruptors of it.
Well, yes, the Houthis continue to threaten the Red Sea. And yes, Iran is warning against ground invasions. But let me ask you this, and I want you to really consider the mechanics of the alternative. If the West retreats now, simply to soothe the financial markets and appease the immediate anxieties of the global South, doesn't that permanently signal to actors like China and Russia that global trade can be disrupted without consequence?
That assumes the West is the only entity capable of securing global trade.
In many ways, it still is. Think of the Strait of Hormuz like a vital artery. If a rogue actor institutes a toll booth regime there, forcing Chinese ships, Latin American freighters, and global tankers to pay extortionate proxy fees just for safe passage, the system is already broken.
I hear you.
If we back down because oil hits $115, we are effectively handing the keys of the global economy to anyone with a drone swarm and a blockade strategy. The long-term costs to the rules-based international order would be catastrophic. We cannot allow critical arteries of global trade to be governed by state-sponsored terrorism.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the reality that the West's credibility as the sole guarantor of that rules-based order is already deeply compromised?
How so? The military dominance is clearly intact.
The military dominance, yes. But the interconnectedness of the planetary economy is too dense for 20th century military interventions to sever cleanly without destroying the very order you are trying to protect.
I mean, we're building alternatives.
You mentioned the European Union's $2.3 billion flagship Africa project, the Libido Corridor, earlier as proof of Western decoupling. It's a great example. But if you actually dig into the diplomatic reports, the Libido Atlantic Railway is heavily reliant on Chinese state-owned firms and Chinese manufactured rail infrastructure anyway. You cannot just bomb your way out of global integration.
But you can force a redirection of capital. We are forcing the world to build redundant, secure supply chains that do not rely on the goodwill of authoritarian regimes.
Let me use an analogy to explain why this strategy is backfiring. Think of the global financial system like a massive, high-stakes casino where everyone is forced to use US dollars as the only accepted chips at the table.
Okay.
For decades, the global South, Asia, and Latin America have played at this table because it was stable. But when the House starts unilaterally confiscating chips, freezing sovereign reserves, and bombing the tables when they don't like the bets being placed, the players don't just sit there. They look for a new casino.
You're referring to the de-dollarization trend.
Exactly. Military hegemony is an outdated tool for a deeply interconnected planet. But attempting to police the globe through aggressive interventions and unilateral sanctions, the current strategy is merely accelerating alternative financial architectures.
It's a risk, sure.
It's a reality. Kenneth Rogoff and other leading economists are openly discussing how this precise environment accelerates the Chinese yuan's path to becoming a global reserve currency within the next 5 years. Nations are terrified of having their dollar reserves frozen or their supply chains bombed, so they are actively seeking shelter in multipolar alliances like BRICS. The U.S. might be winning a tactical military war in the Middle East, but it is unequivocally losing the broader strategic landscape of the 21st century.
It is undeniable that the global system is interconnected, and I acknowledge that the rise of alternative financial architectures is a genuine risk. But that does not mean we must remain paralyzed by the fear of disrupting the status quo.
It's not about fear, it's about basic planetary stability.
But the disruptions we are witnessing, from the Dow's correction to the spike in basic commodities, these are the unavoidable tremors of dismantling an unsustainable and highly dangerous reality. Confronting systemic threats, despite the severe short-term economic and diplomatic costs you have rightly pointed out, is the only path to securing a genuinely resilient global future. Sometimes the casino needs to be shut down and audited if the mob has infiltrated the floor.
But the data simply tells a story of catastrophic overreach. The planetary perspective reveals a world that is fracturing, not healing. From the food and fertilizer crises hitting the world's poorest nations in Latin America and Africa, to the energy strangulation of Asian manufacturing hubs, to the profound diplomatic alienation of the global South, the collateral damage is immense.
It is a heavy toll.
It's staggering. The intervention has demonstrated that aggressive military hegemony does not unify the international community around a rules-based order. It shatters that order. It leaves behind a more dangerous, divided world where alternative powers gladly step into the void, left by a retreating, militaristic West. We're not setting a broken bone. We are shattering the skeletal structure of global cooperation.
Well, we will soon see how the region responds to this immense pressure, with Iran expected to announce its formal response to the 15-point U.S. peace proposal this Friday, and regional leaders in Pakistan scrambling to contain the fallout and mediate a ceasefire. The true cost and the ultimate success or failure of this geopolitical recalibration is still unfolding before our eyes. It is, without a doubt, a violent rebreak of a highly complex system.
And the entire planet is waiting to see if the patient can survive the cure.
We encourage our listeners to weigh the evidence from these global perspectives, look into the market data and diplomatic reports we've discussed today, and continue exploring the material to form your own conclusions. Thank you for joining us.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.